Welcome to MHS Midnight Horror Stories. I know that many of you choose to watch videos on this channel to relax and ease yourself into sleep. That's why we've included calming background music after 10 horror stories, helping you drift off more comfortably. If you enjoy the content on this channel, don't forget to support us by leaving a like or drop a comment letting us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Your support means everything to us and is the biggest motivation for this channel to keep growing. And now, let's step together into tonight's terrifying stories. I work for the UK's National Crime Agency, NCA, and spent 6 years in the Missing Persons Unit. In the United Kingdom, if a person is reported missing and doesn't return within 3 days, their name is passed on to the NCA's Missing Persons Unit. The file on a girl named Emily had been sitting on my desk for over a week before I started working on it. Emily's mother had reported her missing after both Emily and her roommate suddenly stopped answering their phones. The initial investigating officer, IIO, went to the apartment, but no one answered. He checked with the neighbors, who confirmed both had been seen recently. This information was still insufficient to draw any conclusion. So I drove to the address near Brighton, hoping to close the case that same day. The address was a cute, small house. After I rang the bell, a young woman opened the door with a bright smile. She introduced herself as Rachel, Emily's roommate, and cheerfully explained the situation. Rachel said Emily was sick, and that she was too busy with work and taking care of Emily that she missed the calls from Emily's mother and forgot to call back. She was very apologetic for causing worry, but insisted that both she and Emily were fine. The story sounded plausible. However, a case cannot be closed until we have direct contact or evidence that the person is alive. So, I requested to enter the house to see Emily. Rachel happily agreed. As she led me upstairs, she carried a tray with a bowl of hot soup. She smiled. "You're just in time for lunch." Rachel explained that Emily had a virus. She had been much better over the past few days, but was still too weak to walk around. But when I followed Rachel into the bedroom upstairs, I immediately realized something that completely contradicted the story. Emily was indeed lying in bed, but she had clearly been deceased for several days. Her body had a sheen, as if moisturized, and her clothes were clean. This proved Rachel had been regularly changing her friend's clothes. Rachel began to spoon-feed the soup to Emily, but it immediately ran out of her mouth. "Oh dear, made a mess again. But don't worry, I'll clean you up," Rachel exclaimed, her tone completely normal. It was a sight that, even now, whenever I recall it, makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Rachel acted as if it were the most normal thing. She spoke gently, encouraging Emily to try and eat so she could recover quickly. For about a minute, all I could do was stand there with my mouth agape. In my entire police career, I had never witnessed such horrific and twisted despair. I regained my composure and asked Rachel to speak with her privately outside for a moment. She agreed, but only briefly, as she didn't want Emily's soup to get cold. In the hallway, I told Rachel that Emily had passed away. In response, I received a blank and slightly indignant look. "Why would you say that?" "I know Emily looks bad, but I think she'll be up and walking in a few days." I tried to assure Rachel that this would not happen. After a few seconds of silence, Rachel excused herself to return to the bedroom before the soup cooled down. I left the house through the front door, quickly walked to my car, and pulled out my phone. The Emily case, confirming the victim is deceased. Roommate shows signs of severe mental distress, requesting backup and intervention immediately. Hanging up, I stood silent for a moment. When I looked back at the house, I was startled to see Rachel standing at the door, looking at me with utter fury. I guessed she had heard what I said on the phone. I walked back over seriously informing her that what she was doing was illegal and that she must turn Emily's body over to the authorities or she would be arrested. I continued to reassure her and thought I had convinced her. But then, Rachel changed again. Her eyes widened and she yelled, demanding that I leave immediately. "Okay, Rachel, I'm going," I said softly. But as I turned my back, I unconsciously pulled out my phone, an action that seemed to trigger a fierce burst of anger. She thought I was going to call the agency again. Rachel lunged, knocking the phone out of my hand. I bent down to pick it up and told her to calm down, but Rachel wouldn't listen. She screamed, "You're going to arrest me! Where are you going to take me?" Before I could react, Rachel jumped onto my back, causing both of us to fall to the ground. The hard impact left me stunned. I distinctly felt Rachel's fingers reaching up, aiming for my eyes. I was 5 feet 11 inches tall, and she was only about 5 feet 4 inches tall, but having to struggle with a woman insane with grief was extremely difficult. It wasn't until I mentioned Emily's family that Rachel stopped, breaking down into deep sobs. I continued to reassure her until my colleagues arrived. It was only then that I realized I had 3 deep scratches on my face. Rachel was taken away first, followed by Emily's body. I returned to the office to contact Emily's mother. Initial investigation suggested that Emily had passed away from an unexplained, prolonged illness, possibly exactly as Rachel had said, a debilitating virus. And Rachel had simply been unable to accept the truth. No one knows exactly when Emily died, because Rachel had tried to continue caring for her, keeping the body clean. Rachel was charged with assaulting a police officer and obstructing a lawful burial. But due to her fragile mental state at the time of the incident, she received a light suspended sentence and was ordered to undergo psychological treatment. After her release, Rachel wrote me a letter apologizing for what happened. I forgave her and told her it was just part of my job. That case made me profoundly understand people living with mental health disorders. They are not just suffering from loss, but they are struggling to hold onto a version of reality they can tolerate. For Rachel, accepting her best friend's death was impossible, and she chose the only way her damaged mind could think of: denying reality. My name is Linda. I am 25 years old and work for a media company in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. The story I am about to tell is completely true. It happened to me, and it started back when I was a college student. In college, there was a guy in my class named Jason. He was a bit different. At first, everyone liked him because he was very good at foreign languages, but as we got used to college life, his strange side started to show. Jason was often silent during group conversations. It wasn't because he was shy. It felt like he didn't care about what we were saying. He would just stand there and listen, watching and judging everyone. It felt like he was analyzing us like test subjects. I once caught him muttering to himself in the hallway. I'm not a nosy person, so I just walked past him. I thought he was just memorizing notes or talking to himself to handle stress. I didn't realize back then that I was ignoring a major warning sign. Jason didn't always act weird. Most of the time, he studied and talked to a few classmates normally. But then, one specific event happened that made me want to stay away from him at all costs. One day, Jason and a friend were sitting right behind me in class talking very loudly. I turned around and gave them a simple shh sign to be quiet. Immediately, he gave me a look of pure hatred. His eyes were cold and filled with anger. Then, Jason started muttering again. This time, I could tell it wasn't English. It was French. I had studied French for 3 years in high school. I froze when I heard his words. Tu vas regretter d'avoir ouvert ta sale bouche, petite merde. You're going to regret opening your dirty mouth, 1. You little piece of shit. He wasn't just cursing. He used a foreign language to hide his threat, thinking I wouldn't understand. Being cursed at in broad daylight by someone sitting right behind me was disgusting. After the break, I immediately moved to a different seat. I tried my best to stay far away from him. My fear wasn't for nothing. Soon, rumors started that Jason carried dangerous EDC, everyday carry items. I saw it with my own eyes during a group project meeting. When a male student disagreed with Jason's idea, Jason didn't argue back. Instead, he stayed silent. He slowly pulled a tactical folding knife with a sharp, serrated blade out of his jacket pocket. He didn't stab anyone, but he calmly flicked the blade open. He used the tip of the knife to move papers on the table while staring at the other student with a crazy, challenging look. I was shocked and left the area immediately. After that, I lived in constant caution. I did everything I could to avoid him. I signed up for different class times and avoided any subjects where he might show up. Then, during our sophomore year, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. All classes moved online. Not having to see Jason on campus every day was a huge relief. I finished my degree a semester early and graduated. I started my job at the media company and almost completely forgot that Jason existed. Until today, it was just a normal day at work. After my lunch break, I was walking back to my desk from the restroom. I saw a man standing right in front of the office door. He was wearing a blue medical mask and a loose jacket, staring at his phone. Everything seemed fine until I got closer. His eyes suddenly bulged and locked onto me. I was confused and stared back for a few seconds. I felt a chill and quickly typed in the door code. As I walked in, he said something through his mask, but I couldn't hear him clearly. I went back to my desk and even told my coworker about it as a weird story for the day. But a few minutes later, I went numb. I saw Sam, our recruiter, leading the man in the mask into the conference room. I opened the company's meeting schedule on my computer. My heart nearly dropped when I saw the name of the candidate being interviewed for the analyst position, Jason. I stared through the glass wall. Jason looked professional in a button-down shirt now, but every time Sam looked away, Jason would glance over toward my desk. The job he is applying for is data analyst. For someone like Jason, who likes to collect information and has a need for control, this is a very dangerous position. He would have access to the employee list, home addresses, and phone numbers for all of us, including mine. The French curses and the knife in the classroom were never reported to the police. In the eyes of HR, he is a talented candidate with a clean background check. I'm facing a terrifying choice. If I stay silent, I might have to deal with this walking red flag for 8 hours every day. If I report him, I have to explain things from college that I have no proof for. I look down at my hands. They are still shaking on the keyboard. Should I stop this before the interview list turns into the new hire list? What once seemed like a perfect decision turned into the worst nightmare. The house by the lake was our dream, but now, every night, I hear Devlin's voice calling from the cold water. I'm Oscar, 37 years old. My wife is Xavier, who was my junior in college. We have a 6-year-old son named Devlin. My wife and I are in the real estate business. Specifically, we buy old houses for cheap, then renovate them and resell them for a profit. The business provides my wife and me with a stable income. 2 months ago, we bought a very spacious house on the edge of town that even had a swimming pool in the front yard. What made it even better was the low price, and my wife and I were thrilled we had found such a great deal. After inspecting the house and estimating the cost and time for repairs, I suggested to my wife that we should move here. Once renovated, the house would be an ideal place to live. Devlin also needed a stable and spacious environment to grow up in. Xavier was completely convinced and agreed. After the renovations were completed, my family moved into the new house. Unlike my wife's and my excitement, Devlin seemed shy and uncomfortable with the new house. Xavier and I thought he just needed time to get used to the new place. Devlin's room and our room were on the second floor, separated by a staircase leading down to the living room. We prioritized cleaning and decorating Devlin's room first to make him feel as comfortable as possible. On the first night in the new house, Devlin said he was scared and wanted his parents to stay until he fell asleep. Our family of 3 lay on Devlin's small bed and read a fairy tale book. A while later, seeing that Devlin was fast asleep, we went back to our room. In the middle of the night, our son's screams woke us up. My wife quickly ran to Devlin's room and hugged him tightly to reassure him. I waited for him to calm down and asked him what was wrong. Devlin said a monster with big feet had been standing and looking at him. We realized Devlin had a nightmare. Xavier told me to go back to our bedroom and that she would stay with him. Devlin's mood got worse over the next few days. He was always scared and said he kept hearing a voice whispering in his ear. We were quite worried about our son's health, so we hired a psychologist to come to the house. We waited in the living room while Devlin talked to the doctor upstairs in his room. About an hour later, the psychologist came downstairs and said Devlin had an anxiety disorder. She told us we needed to pay more attention to him and talk to him more. But contrary to what the psychologist said, Devlin's behavior became increasingly abnormal. At times, he was timid and shy, and at other times, he was aggressive and easily angered. One morning, while I was with some construction workers retiling the living room floor, I was startled by Xavier's yelling from outside in the yard. When I ran out, I saw Xavier and Devlin getting out of the car. Xavier was very upset, uttering words of blame, while Devlin looked sad with his head down. I was confused and asked what had happened to them. Xavier said Devlin had been suspended from school for a few days due to his rebellious behavior and for hitting his classmates. I told Xavier to calm down and to leave us alone so I could talk to our son. She angrily said she would invite the same psychologist back to talk to our son again. She's dead. Devlin's words froze my wife and me in place. I knelt down, looked Devlin straight in the eyes, and gently asked him where he got that information. Devlin said the mysterious voice told him that. Xavier quickly called the female doctor, but the person who answered the phone was her mother. She told us that her daughter had been in a car accident for reasons that were unclear. The day of the accident was the day after she spoke with Devlin. We were incredibly confused about everything and decided we had to pay more attention to Devlin. On the days he was not in school, Devlin just stayed in his room and painted. My wife and I spent time talking and listening to Devlin to understand his state of mind. I also reduced my work hours to take our son out to play. The most important thing to us now was our son. Xavier and I didn't want to make any mistakes in raising Devlin, and we didn't want to miss any of his developmental milestones. One night, I woke up to a very loud noise from the swimming pool. I quickly went to check, with Xavier anxiously following behind. When we got there, I was stunned to see Devlin's small body floating on the surface of the pool. Xavier screamed as soon as she saw the heartbreaking scene. Everything seemed to collapse. We couldn't believe we had lost Devlin forever. The incident happened so quickly that Xavier couldn't recover. She blamed me for not prioritizing installing a protective fence around the pool. I also reached my breaking point and said some harsh things to my wife. Xavier immediately packed her things and left. I didn't hold on to her or even look after her for a second. I stayed in this house full of grief alone, and I chose to work to temporarily forget everything. I sleep in Devlin's room because I miss my son so much. Many nights I hear Devlin's screams for help. I wake up, hug my son's small pillow, and cry. I blame myself for indirectly causing Devlin's death. Sometimes, in our busy lives, we forget that the most important things are right in front of us. A child needs to be cared for, not only with material things, but also with our time, our listening, and especially their safety. Protective measures may seem as simple as a pool fence, but the smallest oversight can lead to a lifetime of regret. Take the time to truly be with your children, listen to their fears, and never compromise a child's safety for any reason. I still clearly remember my heart pounding that night and the crazy look in his eyes when he saw me. Now I can finally tell this story calmly. I'm Iris, a third-year college student at a university in Georgia. I share a small house with my two best friends from freshman year, Nora and Quinn. We lived like three sisters, sharing everything with each other. It all started when Nora suddenly announced she was taking a leave of absence from school to go home for medical treatment. We were all surprised because Nora looked completely healthy. On the day she left, Nora cried a lot. We told Nora to keep in touch and promised to visit her when the semester was over. Since Nora left, the house had become much quieter. That weekend, Quinn went home to visit her family. I was even lonelier being by myself. I was in my room studying for an exam. Around 10 p.m., I heard a noise from the kitchen. At first, I didn't pay attention because I was focused on studying, but the noise repeated like someone was rummaging through a cabinet. My heart started to beat faster. I walked out of my room. It was dark outside, with only the light from my room shining out. Suddenly, the kitchen light turned on. I put my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. After a few seconds of observation, I slowly moved toward the kitchen. As soon as I stepped out of the hallway, I saw a dark figure standing in front of the refrigerator. It was a tall man. His shoulders were broad, and he had a long scar on his left forearm. When he turned around, I was startled again to see his red face and scraggly beard. But there was something familiar about him when I looked a little closer. He came toward me aggressively. "Where's Nora?" Hearing Nora's name, I suddenly realized it was her boyfriend. But the person I had seen before was a brown-haired guy with a bright smile, completely different from the man in front of me. I tried to stay calm and said Nora had taken a leave of absence and wasn't here. He frowned, looking surprised. He didn't believe me and demanded that I tell him the truth. I repeated everything again, and I told him to leave immediately. He sneered and started pacing in the kitchen. He talked about how Nora had said she needed time to think and then completely disappeared, forcing him to look everywhere for her. As he said that, he suddenly shoved a chair and yelled, "Where is Nora?" His eyes were wide, and spit flew from his mouth as he screamed. He ran into the living room looking around for her. Then he ran to the bathroom door and opened it. Seeing no one, he ran to my bedroom door yelling, "Nora, I know you're in there!" I just stood there, my hands and feet numb as stone, my mind blank, unable to think. The scene in front of me was too crazy, and I lost all ability to react. The crazy guy didn't stop. He started smashing things when he couldn't find Nora. The sounds of breaking things echoed through the house like a nightmare. I couldn't stand there anymore. While he was distracted, I ran back to my room. I locked the door and, with trembling hands, called 911. I whispered to the dispatcher that there was a violent intruder, that I was alone, and that I was very scared. Before I could finish my sentence, a very loud banging on the door rang out. "Open the door! Nora's in there, isn't she?" I was startled and dropped my phone. The next second, I quickly grabbed my phone and begged the police to come as fast as they could. In that moment, I burst into tears, feeling desperate because I was facing a crazy person all by myself. After a few seconds of banging on the door, the sounds got louder and the door rattled violently. The crazy guy was using his shoulder to ram the door. He roared that he would find Nora no matter what. I huddled in the corner, covering my ears. After a few seconds, the door suddenly went silent. Then it turned to the next terrifying sound. He was repeatedly knocking on the lock. I panicked, realizing he was about to get in. My mind was blank, and I didn't know what to do except pray that the police would get there in time. The final clang rang out loudly, and the door flew open. He burst into the room, his red eyes scanning the place. "Where's Nora? Where are you hiding her?" He flipped the bed, pulled all the clothes out of the closet, and threw everything around the room. I huddled in the corner, not daring to move. "I'm asking you one more time, where's Nora?" he yelled in despair, continuing to smash things. My fear reached its peak. I was in a small room with a crazy person, and I felt like I was about to die from panic. I couldn't breathe and could only pray for it to end. Finally, police sirens blared loudly. He stopped smashing things. It took him a few seconds to process. Then he ran to the front door. The sounds of yelling and scuffling echoed in. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on my door. "The intruder has been arrested. You can come out now," an officer announced. I shakily stepped out and saw the house was a war zone. He was taken away on charges of breaking and entering and making threats, and would be held for at least 48 hours. I couldn't sleep a single minute that night. The next day, I called Nora. When I told her what had happened, she was silent and then burst into tears. Nora apologized for putting me in danger. She never thought he would come all the way here. The truth was, Nora didn't actually take a leave of absence because of an illness. She left to get away from him. Nora told me about the terrifying months she had gone through. He had controlled her every move, manipulated her psychologically, and threatened violence every time Nora wanted to leave him. I thought leaving would end everything, but I never thought it would make him go crazy and act like that. I encouraged Nora a lot, telling her to come back to school because he had been arrested. He was sentenced to 1 year of probation and a 5-year restraining order against Nora. Nora agreed. Quinn also came back and was shocked to hear what had happened. We cleaned everything up together. In the following days, we replaced all the locks and installed a security camera system. 3 months later, sitting in the repaired house, I still jump every time I hear a strange noise. Nora is now back in school, stronger, and no longer having to face her dark past alone. We've grown closer after what happened, and realized that no matter how much darkness there is, as long as you have faith and support, you will always find the light to move forward. I have been a firefighter for 12 years, but the cruelest thing is that I couldn't save my own wife. A year ago, I was on an overnight shift. My house caught fire because of a faulty furnace. When I finally got home, it was too late. My wife died from smoke inhalation. My son survived because his bedroom was at the end of the hall. David was 9. He remembered and felt the horror of that night very clearly. For the first few months after the funeral, I thought I could handle everything. I promised I would take care of David and make up for his mom's loss. I woke up early to make his breakfast. It was usually simple stuff, like toast and eggs. He had become very withdrawn after the accident. He would sit, look at his breakfast, and then look at me. If Mom were here, I wouldn't have to eat the same 4 meals every week, right? I froze, looking at him, unable to say anything. That day, he decided to skip breakfast and just go to school. On the way to work, I started crying again. I only let myself cry in the car. I missed my wife so much, and I felt so completely helpless. The same questions kept repeating in my head. Why didn't I come home earlier? Why didn't I notice the furnace was broken? Since the accident, I started volunteering for the most dangerous missions. Each time I rushed into a fire, I felt a slight sense of relief, as if I was making amends for Sarah's death. But every time I came home and saw my son sitting alone in the living room, I felt scared. I didn't know how to talk to him. Then October came, and it was the day of David's school field day. I had promised him I would be there to cheer him on. That morning, I woke up early to pack his lunch. I made his mom's grilled chicken salad, which David always loved. But then the station got an emergency call. I quickly shoved the lunchbox into my bag and rushed out to the scene. The entire time I was on the job, I couldn't stop thinking about David. Luckily, I didn't arrive too late, but it was already past lunchtime. The stadium was loud, filled with laughter and cheers. Lots of parents were there, rooting for their kids. I found David sitting by himself, constantly looking down at the ground. I walked over quickly, trying to force a smile. "David, Dad's here." He looked up at me. There was no emotion in his eyes. I sat down next to him, trying to keep my voice cheerful. "I'm so sorry I'm late. We had a big emergency at the station, but I brought lunch." I opened my bag and took out the lunchbox. But when I lifted the lid, I froze. The food was a messy jumble. The dressing had spilled out, sticking to the sides of the container. The box must have gotten knocked around while I rushed out to the call. "Dad tried to make the dish your mom always made. But..." David looked at the ruined lunch and then at me. This time I saw an emotion in his eyes, but it was just disappointment. If Mom was alive, everything would be different. All Dad knows how to do is burn things down. That sentence felt like falling into an abyss. I couldn't get a single word out because I knew he was right. I went back to the station and thought about my wife. I wished she could come back. I took 2 tranquilizers and drifted off to sleep. And then the dream came again. I saw my wife lying in the ashes. Her hair was burnt, her facial skin was cracked, and her eye sockets were 2 empty black holes. She crawled toward me, each movement slow and painful. I smelled the burnt odor coming from her black, partially missing fingers. "Why didn't you get here in time? Why did you abandon me?" I woke up with a gasp, trying to calm myself down. The clock showed 3 a.m., and I tossed and turned until morning. On the nights that followed, the dream kept repeating. Sometimes I saw myself standing in front of the burning house, hearing my wife and son calling for help inside, but I couldn't move. The fire swallowed everything. Thick black smoke billowed from the windows, and I just stood there, helpless. I started to be afraid of going to sleep. I took more tranquilizers every night, but they only made the nightmares more real. They didn't make them go away. I knew my body was breaking down, but I couldn't tell anyone. David wasn't doing any better. He was getting thinner by the day. His teacher called and said he always sat alone in class, sometimes staring out the window with an empty look. I was truly helpless. Both of us were trapped in our own private pain. The next morning, I was at the station when we got a call about a fire at David's school. I immediately bolted to the parking lot. My colleagues called out to me, but I didn't listen. All I could see was the image of my son trapped in the flames. I had only one thought: I won't lose anyone else this time. When I got to the school, the fire had already spread to the second floor. The scene was pure chaos. I jumped out of the truck, grabbed my oxygen mask, and ran straight into the fire. David's classroom was at the end of the hall. The smoke was so dense, I could only see a few feet in front of me. I crawled on the floor, yelling my son's name. The fire crackled, and the ceilings groaned, signaling they were about to collapse. I crawled even faster. At the end of the hall, I saw him huddled in a corner. When he heard my voice, he opened his eyes. I crawled to him, hugged him, took off my turnout coat, and wrapped David inside it. Then I stood up and ran. Flames leaped up on both sides, but I didn't stop. I held my son tight and ran straight through the fire. Thank God we made it out. We both collapsed onto the grass. My crew immediately helped, and the ambulance was right there. I heard David crying and repeatedly calling for Dad. I held him, whispering, "I'm sorry I wasn't there when your mom and you needed me most." David hugged me back, and in that moment, I felt a sense of relief. David and I both had some burns, but luckily, nothing serious. No one died in the fire. That's truly the best outcome for firefighters like us. That night, in the hospital room, David slept on the bed next to me. Sleep was no longer terrifying for me. I saw our familiar kitchen, and my wife was standing by the stove. She was making the grilled chicken salad. She looked at me and smiled. "Thank you for not giving up. I know I can't change the past, but I still have a chance to get things right now." We will always carry the memory of our happy family of 3. Some wounds never completely heal, but a strong enough love can help us learn how to keep moving forward, even with the burns still in our hearts. I'm Francis, and I grew up in a tiny spot called Mill Creek, Wyoming. I was raised by a single mom. Words like strict and rules weren't really in her vocabulary, but there was one thing she told me never to do: go near the house of old Harold Crane. Harold lived in a trailer on the edge of town and made a living by going through people's trash at night to find stuff to sell or turn into something else to sell. He only did this after dark. My mom said Harold was a monster and that he had killed a good friend of hers in high school. That was all she ever said about it. I think it was too painful for her. Over the years, I would overhear little bits of information about Harold's life and the murder he got away with. People said never to walk around the town lake at night because Harold would probably be wandering around there. Not everyone was afraid of Harold, though. Some people seemed to pity him. I remember when I was about 14, I was hanging out with a friend, and his mom was with us. My friend mentioned Harold like he was the boogeyman, but his mom said, "All that poor man wants is to be left alone." I deeply remembered her expression and her tone of voice. It wasn't until much later that I understood the reason behind it. When I was 17, my mom got drunk one night and told me the story of how Harold had killed her best friend. She was crying and looking at old high school photos. Even though he sometimes partied too much, he was a good person, and it's heartbreaking to have his life end at such a young age. My mom said it was an outdoor party with her and her friends. My mom's best friend had gone into the bushes to pee. Suddenly, he saw a person carrying what looked like a child over his shoulder, walking through the brush. My mom's friend yelled out, and the person immediately ran away. He chased after the person, but when he caught up, the guy dropped the child and turned around, shooting the poor friend repeatedly. He fell down instantly, with no time to react. The child they saved was taken to the hospital, but ended up dying anyway because of a massive amount of tranquilizers in their system. My mom insisted that Harold was the one who shot her friend, but for some reason, he was never arrested or went to jail. Now I understood why people were either so scared of him or hated him so much. The hatred simmered for months until I decided I had to do something. I told a couple of friends my idea. One said he had asked his dad about the kid who died from a drug overdose, and his dad confirmed it was true. However, the kid was found in town, not near the lake. That small detail didn't matter. The story was basically the same, and Harold had to pay for what he did years ago. That night, I hatched my plan. I was going to walk to his trailer around midnight and burn it down. I knew it was a stupid idea. It might kill him. But all I could think about at the time was the sight of him waking up, running out, standing there angry, and having to move away. I didn't have any money, so I stole a can of paint thinner from the school's art supplies closet. I lied and said I was going home after a bonfire with friends. In reality, I headed toward Harold's place. It took me about an hour to walk. When I was about half a mile away, I turned off my flashlight and walked along the water's edge until I saw the light from Harold's trailer. I watched until the TV sound inside stopped and the light went out. I waited a little longer until everything was completely silent. Then, I took the can of paint thinner from my backpack and started to creep forward. I was pretty confident, thinking I had approached without being seen. But then, just as I was about to open the paint thinner can, I suddenly heard a loud click from the right. I immediately recognized the sound of a gun. "What you got there, boy?" I froze. knowing it was Harold, and he had caught me red-handed. I didn't say anything. Harold then told me to drop what I was holding. He shined a flashlight on me, ordering me to turn around so he could see my face. At that moment, my body was almost paralyzed. I was trembling as he rushed forward and spun me around. When he saw me, he quickly shoved me away. I fell backward, too scared to even beg for mercy. He just stared at me for a moment, then called my name out loud to confirm. I was stunned. He not only knew my name, but also who my mom was. After I nodded to confirm, he said, "I've been wondering how long it would take for you to show up." Harold invited me inside and promised to tell me everything I wanted to know. When I sat down, he asked what my mother had told me about him. Though I was still quite scared, I was brave enough to express that I hated him for killing my mom's friend. Harold only smiled as I recounted the event in my mother's version. He didn't interrupt at all, but when I finished, he told me, "All right, kid. Here's what really happened." My mom's friend was a big troublemaker, and even though people tried to help, he only got worse. The night he was killed, the person walking by the lake with the child over his shoulder wasn't Harold. It was my mother's friend. In reality, the situation was nearly the opposite. Harold was out trash picking as usual when he stumbled upon a group of drunk teenagers walking by the lake at night. He followed them to make sure they didn't walk towards his trailer. Harold noticed that one of the teenagers was carrying something over his shoulder that looked like an unconscious child. Harold moved closer and heard the teenagers planning to do something terrible to that unconscious child. As soon as he heard that, Harold turned on his flashlight and told them to drop the child. The person carrying the child was my mom's old high school friend. He pulled out a knife and was preparing to stab the child in the chest when Harold fired a few shots into his chest, and he died instantly. Harold said he didn't get a good look at the other teenagers who ran away, but one of them was definitely a girl. Afterward, he carried the child into town and left her at the gas station, where an employee was working the night shift. That employee called 911, but Harold didn't stay. He just told the employee there was a dead body near the lake, and the police should go there. He was the one who did it. The police stopped by the next morning and arrested Harold. But his story checked out, and the parents of the missing girl were so relieved to have their daughter back home that they could only thank him. To them, Harold was a hero. However, Harold didn't feel like a hero. He had promised himself never to hurt another human being as long as he lived. That's why he lived in isolation. If he could have saved that little girl's life, it would have been worth it. But she was probably already dying from the tranquilizers the moment he saw her. He was tormented that the criminals were still walking free. So, he stayed away from town, unable to bear living near the former criminals who were now adults. He didn't know exactly who they were, but he thought my mother was very likely one of them. Harold said he didn't care if I believed him or not. He only wanted me to do one thing: go home, tell my mother what he had just told me, then look her in the eye and ask if it was all true. I did exactly that. It's best not to detail how that conversation went. Our relationship was never repaired. Since that night, I've carried a heavy feeling, disgust with myself for planning to do something so foolish, and heartbreak knowing the harsh truth about my mother. I often wonder if I can ever forgive her. Nearly 20 years have passed, and I haven't dared to return to Wyoming, because every road and every house there reminds me of the night that changed my entire life. I'm Ryder. This happened when I was 14. My mom and I had moved to Austin, Texas, after my dad died in a car accident 3 years earlier. My mom worked the night shift as a nurse at a hospital, so I was often home alone. I was a pretty lonely kid, partly because of my personality, and partly because of a strange allergy that made me have to avoid most things: rainwater, peanuts, milk, and even animal fur. My only joy was playing video games, and I was really good at them. I had a group of gaming friends, and they called me a prodigy. It all started when my mom brought home a new allergy medication. Many patients had tried it and found it to be very effective. I was desperate to get rid of this awful disease, so I was willing to try any medicine. My mom told me to take 2 pills every morning. They had no taste. And to my surprise, the pills actually worked for me. I could eat cheese pizza and leave the house without my mask and long clothes. I even tried petting the neighbor's dog. I was fine. There were no unusual signs. My mom was so happy that I had finally found the right medication. But then, strange signs started to appear. I was less focused and often zoned out. I would sit in front of the screen with my mouse in hand, but my reflexes were slower than usual. In an important match with my team, I kept making stupid mistakes. I could sense my friends' frustration and disappointment, but I didn't know how to explain it. Gradually, I started declining invitations to play games. I didn't feel as happy as before. Everything felt meaningless. I would play by myself in silence, but I chose to stay silent instead of telling my mom. I didn't want to worry her. My mom's job was incredibly busy. Every time she came home, she would cook, ask me a few questions, and then go to sleep because she was exhausted. I didn't want to bother her more. That fateful night, I was home alone as usual, and for the first time, I felt the apartment was eerily quiet. I sat alone in my room, staring at the computer screen that showed a defeated game. "You're not good at anything anymore," a thought popped into my head, but it was just a fleeting thought. But slowly, the thoughts became more frequent. I covered my ears, but the voice still echoed, because it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside my head. "Your friends don't need you anymore. Your mom worked so hard to raise a useless kid." I shook my head hard, trying to chase it away, but the voice continued, every word as clear as if someone was sitting right next to me, whispering in my ear. My heart was pounding. Cold sweat started to run down my body. "They just pity you. They laugh at you behind your back. You know what you have to do." My body stood up as if I were being controlled. My feet automatically walked toward the medicine cabinet. I grabbed every bottle, painkillers, sleeping pills, and even the allergy medication I was using. I poured them all into a plastic cup and turned on the faucet to dissolve them. "Drink it, then everything will end. You won't be a burden to anyone anymore." I picked up the cup and brought it to my mouth. Just as I started to feel the bitter taste of the pills spreading on my tongue, the phone suddenly rang. I was startled. It was a text message from Jake. "Hey, you want to play? We're gonna lose without you." The voice in my head went silent as I read the message. I looked at my phone, then at the cup of pills. Maybe I should play one last game, at least to say goodbye to the thing that used to be my everything. I put the cup down and went back to my room and turned on the computer. The game lasted longer than I thought it would, and I was leading the team. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little bit of joy. I heard my friends talking, yelling, laughing, and cheering every time I scored. I don't remember how long I played. When I heard the sound of a car, I looked at the clock, startled. My mom was home from work. Suddenly, I heard my mom call my name loudly and urgently. Before I could answer, the door to my room burst open. "What's wrong, Mom?" I was confused about what was happening. My mom ran to me and hugged me tightly. "Thank God you're safe." My mom's face became tense again. She sat down next to me and told me she had received serious news about the allergy medication I was taking. Many other people who took this medicine had experienced terrible side effects like hallucinations, severe depression, and some had even taken their own lives. I shivered, suddenly understanding why I had heard the whispering voice in my head and why I had had such horrible thoughts. My body trembled as I realized I had almost become another victim. I told my mom about what had been happening to me for the past few weeks. Just a few hours ago, I had even considered drinking that cup of poison. If it hadn't been for that text message inviting me to play, I might have. My mom hugged me, crying and repeatedly apologizing for leaving me alone. I didn't notice you were changing. I was so worried about work that I forgot you needed attention. I hugged my mom back just as tightly. I apologized to my mom for not telling her from the beginning. But now I understand that if I had spoken up, things might have been different. From that day on, my mom always asks me how I feel. I've also learned to tell my mom everything. We understand that in a family, listening and caring for each other every day is what matters most. Now, I take a different allergy medication. My mom has requested a shift change so she can be home with me more often. I was truly terrified after I learned how I had accidentally escaped death. I have changed. I'm no longer a lonely child who locks myself away to hide from my illness. I participate in all kinds of activities, and I try more types of food to see if I'm okay with them. My mom and I both learned that listening, connecting, and knowing when to speak up can save not just a moment, but an entire life.
I'm Richard, 29 years old. I work as a driver for the ride-sharing company Uber. Currently, I live with my grandmother in a small house in San Francisco. Here, the demand for ride-sharing services from people is very high. I might be able to scrape out a living for me and my grandmother. If there's no important matter, I'll work every day from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. One weekend evening, I had almost no passengers for the whole day. At 10 p.m. when I was about to end my workday, suddenly the app showed a ride request. Looking at the distance, it was quite far, in the suburban area. But since I didn't have many passengers all day, I gladly decided to accept the ride. The passenger's location was about a mile from where I was standing. I started moving to pick up the passenger. When I arrived at the exact location, there was no one around. I felt quite anxious, thinking of calling the customer. Suddenly, a girl appeared out of nowhere, bending down to look through the car window and smiling at me. I startled. I dropped my phone, taking a few seconds to process everything. I quickly got out of the car to greet the girl, but I began to feel uneasy. She, with long tousled hair, wearing a long white dress, holding a doll. It wasn't an ordinary doll. Its face was haunting with large black eyes covering half of its face. It was more terrifying than the Annabelle doll in the horror movie I watched. As I was lost in my thoughts about the doll, suddenly the girl spoke.
"Take me home, please."
Her voice was very soft, giving a gloomy feeling as if echoing from the depths of hell. I felt a surge of cold air running down my spine. I nervously chuckled and opened the car door for her. But she looked at me with amusement and then proceeded to open the door and sit in the back seat. I quickly sat in the driver's seat and started the car. Even though I'm a 29-year-old guy with a fairly tall stature, in that situation, I'm sure anyone would be as shaken as I was. I drove, my body drenched in sweat even though the air conditioning in the car was on. As I was about to stop at a red light, that girl uttered that scary voice again.
"What if we run the red light? If you get fined, I'll pay, don't worry."
After saying that, she chuckled, and I also laughed out loud to dispel that ominous atmosphere. But my laughter stuck in my throat. I said I'm a law-abiding person, so I wouldn't do that.
You're such a coward, but living people are usually like that, unlike me.
Again, that teasing laughter, but it was really not amusing at all. My body was cold, but I kept sweating. All I could do was to gulp and stay as calm as possible. I remained silent, trying to drive a bit faster to end this ride. Occasionally, I glanced at the rearview mirror to check on the back seat. "Focus on driving, please," that gentle voice echoed, making me startle, instantly stiffening my body. Suddenly, there was a desperate scream, and reflexively I turned back to look. A grotesque face with bulging white eyes full of red veins, the mouth screaming loudly, was inches from my face. The horror I felt at that moment cannot be described. I panicked and screamed loudly. Fortunately, the sharp reflexes of a driver helped me step on the brake correctly, instead of the gas pedal. The girl, holding the doll with the grotesque face, fell back into the back seat, laughing hysterically. I still hadn't recovered. My heavy breathing only seemed to excite her even more.
Do living people get startled like that?
What on earth was happening to me? I didn't know if I was carrying a person, a ghost, or mentally unstable. Seeing that I didn't say anything, discomfort was evident on her face. She twisted the doll's head back to its original position, with the black eyes as before, then dirtied it. She said she just wanted to play a little. I had thought of ending this ride here. The girl pointed forward, saying we were almost home, and I just needed to drive a little further. Having come this far, I reconsidered and continued driving. Now, whether it was a person or a ghost or anything else, I didn't care anymore. When we reached where she called home, I stopped, got out of the car politely, and opened the door. She stepped out, smiling at me. Now I looked closely. She was extremely beautiful, with a bright, innocent, and very attractive smile. The ride cost $40, and she handed me a $100 bill, saying there was no need to return the change. I thanked her and was about to turn and leave, but looking around, it was a dark dirt road with no houses around. I asked her if she was sure this was home. She laughed and said someone from her family would come to pick her up right now. I looked down and saw her standing on the ground with both feet and casting a shadow on the road under the car's headlights. I breathed a sigh of relief, reassuring myself that this wasn't a ghost. But I couldn't leave her alone like that, so I decided to stay with her until her family came to pick her up. A moment later, a luxurious Rolls-Royce arrived. The girl waved to me and got into the car. Only now did I understand what had happened. I also got in the car and drove in the opposite direction. Looking in the rearview mirror, my mind kept thinking about that girl. Now I remembered I hadn't asked her name. But just a few seconds later, when I looked back, the Rolls-Royce had disappeared into the night. I didn't know when. I couldn't be sure if everything was a dream or real, nor could I tell if that girl was a human or a ghost. I've heard and watched many stories and movies about supernatural phenomena, but I never thought I would encounter such an inexplicable phenomena in real life.
That day, Claire and I swung by this Wendy's on 5th Avenue, the kind that's always packed with people. It wasn't anything fancy, but their menu always had just enough good stuff to keep us coming back. We ordered a couple of sandwiches with fries. Everything was cool until Claire took one bite and just froze. She made a face, then pulled out this long black strand of hair tangled up in the melted cheese. I flagged down a waiter right away. A skinny young guy came over, his red uniform looking a little wrinkled. He took one look at the hair on the plate, and his face went totally pale. I'm not the kind of customer who makes a big deal out of things, but come on, this was just nasty. It was a simple complaint, but the guy reacted like I'd just ruined his whole life. The restaurant manager showed up fast, a middle-aged guy with a big belly and a round, friendly face. He apologized over and over, offered to remake the food, and even comped the whole meal. We didn't have to pay, and Claire didn't want to make a scene. Seemed like everything got handled just fine. But I couldn't shake the look on the waiter's face when he got called to the back. He glanced at the manager, eyes wide, like he was about to cry. It wasn't the kind of fear you get when you're about to be chewed out for messing up. It was pure hopelessness. Claire caught it too. When the kitchen door shut behind them, she shivered a little. We walked out of that place feeling kind of weird, but we didn't think too much about it at the time. Over the next few weeks, we kept going back to the diner. Weird thing was, that same waiter was never there. Every time there was someone new. One time a tiny blonde girl, another time a big, grumpy-looking dude. Different faces, but one thing stayed the same. None of them lasted more than a week. At first, it was just a weird little mystery. Then Claire picked up on something even stranger. The food tasted off. The sandwiches had lost that rich, familiar flavor. The grilled meats didn't have that same smoky smell. The fries? Weirdly bland. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. They probably changed the chef, I said when Claire brought it up. But whoever was back there, the food wasn't just different, it was all over the place. Some days the sandwiches were way too salty. Other days they barely had any flavor at all. Sometimes they were perfect. Other times they tasted so bad it was like someone who had never cooked in their life had thrown them together. Like nobody in the kitchen actually knew what they were doing. Then one day, Claire hit me with a question that made me stop cold. Do you think something was wrong with that waiter last time? I blinked. And just like that, his face popped back into my head, those scared, almost panicked eyes, his whole body tensing up as he walked into the kitchen. I had never seen him again. Hell, I'd never seen any of the employees more than twice. A weird, uneasy feeling crawled up my chest. I glanced down at the sandwich in my hands. Melted cheese, a few slices of cold meat, some fresh lettuce. Looked normal. But suddenly, I didn't feel like eating it anymore. The next time I went back, I made sure to really pay attention. The staff had changed again this time. It was a young woman with brown hair, a pale face, and eyes that stayed glued to the floor. When we ordered, I caught it right away. Her hands were shaking, just barely, but enough to notice. She was scared. The manager, the same friendly-looking guy with the pot belly from before, was standing by the kitchen door, arms crossed, watching, not like a boss checking in on his staff, more like a guard keeping an eye on prisoners. And just like that, I thought of that first waiter, his empty stare, his shaky breathing when he got called inside, and how we never saw him again. Claire and I had already decided we wouldn't come back, but honestly, we should have made that call sooner. We tried looking up info on the place. No reports about missing employees. No one talking about anything weird going on in that kitchen. But there was something even creepier. None of the employees had ever left a single review or comment about the place. No one had ever said they worked there. Not once. Claire turned to me, panic all over her face. Do you think they are? She couldn't even finish, but I knew exactly where her mind was going, and if I was right, then that meant we had eaten. I couldn't let myself go there. Still, we went back. Curiosity, fear, something in between. The place wasn't too crowded. Claire went in first, wanting to talk to whoever the newest employee was. I followed a minute later, scanning the room for her. She was standing near the kitchen counter, eyes wide, frozen in place. I stepped closer and finally understood why Claire looked like that. My stomach turned and I had to force myself not to gag. An arm, pale, skin still freshly cut, thin fingers hanging limp, but that wasn't even the worst part. Right next to me, on a big cutting board, was a meat cleaver. The blade was clean, but not completely clean. A dark brown stain clung to the steel. A small piece of skin, definitely not pork or beef, was still stuck to the edge of the blade. I stumbled back, crashing into a chair, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. Claire grabbed my hand and yanked me hard. We ran. No clue how far, just that by the time we made it back to the car, I was still shaking. And then, it all clicked. The food tasting different every time. The disappearing employees. They didn't quit. They weren't fired. They were ingredients. Claire broke down in tears. We tried calling the cops, but by the time they got there, everything was gone, spotless, like nothing had ever happened. The cops looked at us like we were crazy. They checked the kitchen, searched the whole restaurant, then came back with a simple answer. Nothing suspicious. You sure you weren't just seeing things? One of them asked. I opened my mouth to argue, but then I saw him, the manager, standing right in front of the kitchen door, staring straight at me. The cops looked at us like we were crazy, like he was saying, "No one's gonna believe you." The restaurant stayed open. Customers kept coming, kept eating, like nothing was wrong. but I never went back because I knew one thing for sure. Soon there'd be a new employee.
I work as a dispatch operator at the local police station. I've always wanted to be a police officer, but my health won't let me. Anyway, being a dispatch operator is kind of related to my dream, and I really love it. Even though the town only has about 12,000 people, we still get a ton of calls. Fights, petty thefts, or lost pets. It's always something. Sometimes we get quick calls that only last for a few seconds, but it can take days to investigate or wait for a follow-up. Some calls just cut off suddenly, and then later, we find out there was a murder. 2 weeks ago, there was a murder in town involving a family of 4 that spanned 3 generations. According to the family's camera, the murderer was dressed as a clown. He was so arrogant that he even walked up to the camera and gave it the middle finger. The police were still trying to track down the murderer, but that clown turned the whole thing into a joke. The defiance and arrogance of that crazy, cunning guy kept the police in town awake for days. I confidently said that my job is one of the toughest out there. At night, every call would startle me. "Hello, can I help you?"
"Officer, I'm so scared."
A young girl's voice came through, and then she started crying. Just what kids do when they're scared. "Relax, girl. Where are your parents?"
"They're in the living room, but they've been there for a long time."
I quickly connected the call to the police station. The little girl kept crying, and her voice begging for help made it hard for me to stay calm. I tried to calm her down by saying, "The police will be here soon. What's your name?" Even though she was crying and really scared, the little girl still answered me politely.
"Orla."
"Hey there, my little blonde princess. Can you tell me what's going on?"
"Turbo came to play with me. Then Turbo said he wanted to see my mom. Turbo went into Mom's room. My dad came home and went into the room too."
The little girl stopped talking and just started crying. I felt like I was sitting on a pile of fire, counting every second and hoping the police would show up soon. "What did your dad do next, Orla?"
"Dad, he yelled really loudly. Then Turbo left them in the living room."
"Where are you, Orla?" "I'm playing hide and seek with Turbo, but Turbo has a knife. I'm scared." "You need to hide and make sure Turbo doesn't see you until the police get here." "Who is Turbo?" "I met Turbo at the park. He said he wanted to come to my house to play. Turbo's a clown." I went completely numb when I heard the word clown. It brought up the most terrifying and evil images. I prayed to God to protect Orla and begged him not to take that poor girl away so soon. Back to Orla's call, I asked her what was going on. Knowing everything but not being able to do anything felt like being tortured by an invisible force. I could hear heavy, rushed footsteps and crazy laughter that I guessed was Turbo's.
"Help me. I'm scared."
The last thing Orla said to me in a choked-up voice before the devil found her hiding spot. The clown's crazy laughter, getting louder and clearer, was right next to my ear.
"It's fun, right?"
Orla cried and begged him, but all he did was laugh in that disgusting way when he saw her fear and desperation. And that was his goal, getting his twisted, sick satisfaction as a murderer. He kept the phone connected on purpose so I could hear all those creepy, slimy, deadly sounds. All I could do was scream into the phone, threatening, cursing, and begging him. When I heard the police and the warning gunshots, I still held on to a sliver of hope that Orla would escape the devil.
The girl and her parents were murdered, and he got away again.
I heard a helpless voice from a policeman on the other end of the line, and I dropped the phone in shock. For the first time in my 30 years, I cried like a little kid. Why did I feel so hopeless and in pain? I went to the funeral of Orla's family. That 6-year-old girl was really beautiful, with blonde hair and smart eyes. After the Orla family case, nothing else happened. But we still don't know who the murderer is. Almost a year has gone by, and the police are still trying to figure it out. It's still unclear what that clown is up to, or what other plans he might have.